Hello, and welcome to Jenna Rereads The Silmarillion, Episode 9, The Ultimate Bling. Wow, it has been quite a while since I last recorded one of these. Something like 2 years, I think, which is a long time. I'm really sorry about that. Basically, life intervened in a big way. I started graduate school, and as you could probably imagine, that ended up sucking up a lot of my time, and my fandom participation kind of declined as a result. But now, well, I'm still in grad school, but I'm actually feeling the urge to work on these again. So I'm going to try to continue to get these out more regularly. I don't know if I'll be able to stick to a regular pattern because I am going to be pretty busy in the coming months, but I'm going to at least make an attempt not to have like 2-year gaps in between again, because it would be nice to actually finish this project someday. So, since it's been such a long time, might as well do a recap of what happened in the last episode. We were finally introduced to Fëanor, and we talked about his family situation and how understanding that is really essential to understanding his character going forward. And also, Melkor was released after 3 ages of imprisonment in the halls of Mondos, and the Valar, suffering from a bad case of good is dumb, decide to essentially let him go on good behavior. So Melkor, who's basically like given free reign to roam around in Fëanor, decides he's going to corrupt the Noldor. He's targeting them specifically. And of all the Noldor, he is going to specifically target Fëanor. Now, in terms of how successful he's going to be, we will find out in this chapter of the Silmarils and the Unrest of the Noldor. Okay, so basically, Fëanor has been going along and greatly increasing his skills in terms of making jewels. And so he gets this idea that he wants to try to capture the light of the 2 trees in jewel form. Basically, he wants to create jewels that shine with the light of the 2 trees. And this becomes a big project, and the end result is the creation of the 3 Silmarils. Yes, we are now being formally introduced to the Silmarils, aka the jewels that the book is named after. So the Silmarils are 3 absolutely magnificent, amazing, sparkly jewels that contain the light of the 2 trees. He figured out a way to capture that in jewel form. And I'm going to read some of the book description of exactly what the Silmarils are like. This is in terms of the substance they're made of. Like the crystal of diamonds, it appeared, and yet was more strong than adamant, so that no violence could mar it or break it within the kingdom of Arda. Yet that crystal was to the Silmarils but as is the body to the children of Ilúvatar, the house of its inner fire, that is within it, and yet in all parts of it, and is its life. And the inner fire of the Silmarils Fëanor made of the blended light of the trees of Valinor, which lives in them yet, though the trees have long withered and shine no more. Aside, okay, I guess that's a spoiler, but you know what? Tolkien himself put it right in there, so I guess that doesn't even count. Therefore, even in the darkness of the deepest treasury, the Silmarils of their own radiance shone like the stars of Varda, and yet, as they were indeed living things, they rejoiced in light, and received it and gave it back in hues more marvelous than before. So, that bit at the end there about the Silmarils essentially being like living things, this is something I'll probably talk about more later when we get into how different people react to the Silmarils. But just keep that in mind, that they're almost like living things, kind of like how the One Ring was essentially a living thing, that it had a mind of its own, basically. So everybody is so amazed by the Silmarils that Varda actually hallows them. She basically makes them sacred. And what that means is, another quote here, no mortal flesh, nor hands unclean, nor anything of evil will might touch them, but it was scorched and withered. We'll probably talk about this more, too. Some of this stuff is going to come up as we go on. So basically, they're pretty much sacred. It's a common joke in the fandom. People like to say that the Silmarils were Fëanor's midlife crisis. We would have everybody would have been much better off if he had just bought a Porsche, but unfortunately there were no Porsches in Valinor that he could buy. So everybody is just amazed by the Silmarils. And of course, Melkor, who, keep in mind, remember, Melkor has this whole thing with light, starts lusting after them. He wants them for himself. And this basically increases his drive to find a way to destroy Fëanor, and drive a wedge between the elves and the Valar. So basically, in terms of his approach, into how he's going to achieve this, he basically has kind of a two-pronged attack. What he's going to do is he's going to try to drive that wedge between the elves and the Valar. And he does that by basically spreading lies amongst the Noldor, that the Valar brought them to Valinor to basically imprison them, and that there's all kinds of, empty lands in the east, being Middle-earth, that the Valar don't want them to rule, that they want to keep them, that they want to hand over to humans when they wake up. And though Melkor doesn't actually know that much about humans, because this was when he was doing his little improv session in the third theme of Iluvatar during the music, but he still knows of their existence and that they're going to wake up at some point. So basically, the elves, on the other hand, had no idea about this. So he spreads these lies that the Valar brought the elves to Aman to imprison them because they were jealous of their beauty and their power that Iluvatar had given them, and that they want to save the wide lands of Middle-earth to let humans dominate them. So that's his approach in terms of how he's going to turn the elves against the Valar. Now, he also decides to start exploiting the internal tensions within the Noldor. So if you remember from last week, we had these different factions within the Noldor, which basically broke down along the lines of Finwë's two marriages. You had basically the supporters of Fëanor, and the supporters of Fingolfin and Finarfin. Oh, there's really more Fingolfin. And Melkor starts sowing lies between them, basically that they're plotting against, both sides are plotting to take over. So basically, he's going to Fingolfin and Finarfin and saying, oh, Fëanor never liked you guys, and he's totally going to take over, and Finwë just goes along with whatever he says, and they're going to drive you out of the city. And then, with regards to turning Fëanor against his brothers, well, considering Fëanor's feelings towards Indis and her children, Melkor didn't really have to work particularly hard. He convinces Fëanor that Fingolfin is planning to usurp his place as his father's heir. And considering the kind of close relationship that Fëanor has with Finwë, that he's the favorite son, and the fact that Finwë was the only parent that Fëanor ever had, he's the bit of possessiveness going on here. And And while all this is going on, Fëanor is becoming increasingly Silmaril obsessed. He's so obsessed with the things that he basically stops showing them to anyone that isn't one of his sons or his father. Let's see, there's a line in here that says, he seldom remembered now that the light within them was not his own. He's become so obsessed and enamored with his own creation that he's essentially forgotten that he didn't actually make the light himself. He just imprisoned it in crystal. Also, it doesn't actually say this in here. This is, I think, mentioned more in the History of Middle-earth books. I just want to point out that around this point is when his wife Nerdanel actually leaves him. And said we're not really given much information on when exactly that happened, except it's sort of around this time period. And this is very unusual because divorce isn't really a thing that elves do. And, well, this isn't really a divorce. It's just like a separation, but they don't really do that either. That he's kind of become unbearable. And so she makes the decision to essentially leave him. I can't imagine that he would have taken that well. He's also become susceptible to Melkor's lies regarding the Valar and humans and Middle-earth. He's starting to, become interested in of these wide realms in Middle-earth. This, of course, is going to become important pretty soon, so remember that detail. Meanwhile, the unrest between the different factions of the Noldor is growing so great, they're getting really suspicious of each other, that it gets to the point where Melkor actually starts talking to them about making weapons. Now, this is a huge deal because, Valinor is the sacred land. Like, would anybody need weapons? I mean, it doesn't really say here, but I would assume that the only weapons that they would have had would have been things like bows for hunting, maybe knives for hunting and eating, and maybe also spears for hunting, but that was probably it. Whereas the elves, before they went to Valinor, when they were still living in Cuivianen and having to fight off Melkor's monsters and stuff, might have had crude weapons of their own then. But sort of the implication is that they had to give them up when they went to Valinor. Because there's not supposed to be any violence or killing at all, as we will discuss later on in this book. So Melkor is basically showing them how to make swords and axes and shields and stuff. So Fëanor builds a secret forge where he starts making swords and armor for himself and his sons. And nobody even knew about it. He managed to hide this basically from the Valar, too. And so with all of this going on, things get to a point where Fëanor actually starts talking about rebelling against the Valar. Now, Fëanor's relationship with the Valar is an interesting topic. And I think that Melkor didn't necessarily have to work particularly hard to turn him against the Valar. Because if you think back to what we talked about in the last episode, to the situation with his parents, the Valar were the ones who essentially condemned Miriel to remain in the halls of Mandos forever. Now, I know that Miriel freely consented to it, but once again, like from the perspective of Fëanor, when he was a child, how exactly does that look? Not too good. That in allowing Finwë to marry again, they essentially condemned um, Fëanor's mother to an eternity in the halls of Mondos. So I think that might have been the beginnings of Fëanor, um, Fëanor's doubt regarding the Valar. Now, he does have positive relationship with some Valar at some point because he spent some time as an apprentice to Aule. I think, I believe that's, I don't remember if that's mentioned in here or if it's in one of the History of Middle-earth books. So he was, he was on good terms with Aule at one point. But now he's really started to turn against them. You have this natural suspicion that he had of them combined with Melkor's lies, and now he's actually talking about rebelling against them. He's basically saying that they are keeping the Noldor in thraldom, and, we want to go back to Middle-earth and reclaim what's rightfully ours. So now Finwë is growing increasingly concerned about all of this. So what he does is he summons a council. He's got all his lords there, and Fingolfin is there, and is like, oh my god, Dad, Fëanor is freaking out of control. Can you please do something to try to rein him in? But unfortunately, as he's saying this, Fëanor storms into the room and accuses Fingolfin of plotting to usurp his place with Finwë. And he actually pulls a sword on him. He threatens Fingolfin at sword point, and he says, "See, half-brother, this is sharper than thy tongue. Try but once more to usurp my place and the love of my father, and maybe it will rid the Noldor of one who seeks to be the master of thralls." This, as you could imagine, doesn't go over particularly well. The Valar are very upset about this. They knew that there was some unrest going on among the Noldor. They don't really know that it's Melkor that's causing this, although, honestly, of course it's Melkor. And they see that Fëanor is the first one that's actually, gone so far as to pull a sword on his own brother. So they summon Fëanor to their council, so they decide that they can't just let this go, because said nobody is supposed to be pulling a weapon on anybody within the realm of the Valar. So while they're in council, it's revealed that Melkor was the one that was behind it. So, of course, Tulkas immediately runs away from the council to go find Melkor and try to kick his ass. But even though it was Melkor who was spreading all of these rumors and lies, they don't let Fëanor off because, he still pulled a sword on his half-brother. So what they decide to do is they exile him. For 12 years, he cannot go to the city of Tirion. And Fëanor is justifiably rather pissed off about this. So he goes into exile, and his sons go with him, and interestingly, Finwë goes as well. Now, this decision on Finwë's part, I can't help but think it was a really bad one. I guess he's supporting his son, and I guess I'll probably talk about this a bit more when it comes to discussion. But yeah, I don't think that was a very good move given the political climate. So they all go off into exile at this fortress called Formenos, which is in the hills sort of north of Tirion, and they've got their jewel hoard, and they lock the Silmarils up in a safe. Now, Melkor, in the meantime, has basically realized that he needs to lie low for a bit, since the Valar are now onto him. Then, suddenly, however, he decides to pay Fëanor a visit. And he says all these things to him, like, talking about, I'll help you. You've been exiled unfairly. And I'm a Vala too, and we can, um, and I'm a friend of the Noldor. And Fëanor is sort of listening to it. But then Melkor makes a mistake in that he says to him, "Oh, the Silmarils won't be safe anywhere the Valar rule." And then with that, it's like a light bulb goes on in Fëanor's head, because Melkor has essentially just accused the Valar of trying to do what he himself wants to do, that is, steal the Silmarils. And so Fëanor realizes what Melkor's up to, and I'm going to read this again because it's a great quote. He slams the door and says, first he says, "Get thee gone from thy gate, thou jail crow of Mondos." And he shut the doors of his house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers in Ea. I just think that's a great sentence. So, after that, Melkor kind of goes on the run. Orome and Tolkas are trying to find him, but he escapes through the Calasyria mountains and runs off, and they don't know where he's gone. So there's this real sense of foreboding because they know that Melkor is definitely up to some shit, and it's probably not good. So that's basically where this chapter ends. There's definitely a lot in there to talk about. Mostly I'm going to talk about a couple things, mainly the Valar's intervention in the incident between Fëanor and Fingolfin. Now, you could say that the Valar, technically, they're the ultimate rulers of Valinor. It's their land, so they've got their laws, and, you can't pull weapons on people, so that they were sort of justified in intervening. But on the other hand, it just kind of made things worse. Like, it's not really gonna help Fëanor get over his suspicions of the Valar now, is it? Whereas really, if you think about this, this is really an internal issue between the Noldor. And therefore it's something that I think they should have handled themselves. Although you can make the argument that Finwë couldn't really be unbiased in this situation because, Fëanor is the favorite son, and everybody knows that Fëanor is the favorite son. So that wouldn't really be fair to Fingolfin in this case. But I wonder, why didn't they go to Ingwe? Remember him, the really boring king of the Vanyar, who's for some reason High King of all the elves? Why didn't they, refer to him to, pass judgment on this situation? But no, instead, the Valar are just intervening in Elvish affairs. So I think, in addition to just increasing Fëanor's anti-Valar sentiment, it probably also sort of supported some of the things that Melkor had been saying, and turned more of the Noldor against the Valar. So I kind of think the Valar might have made a mistake here, too. I just don't think that they really handled this situation in the best way. Now, also relating to the topic of the Fëanor being exiled, Finwë's decision to go with him. Now, we're not given an explanation as to why, and I don't think an explanation is ever really given in any of the History of Middle-earth books either, so we can only speculate. I've seen sort of different ideas in fandom as to why he did this. I mean, you have to think that, Fëanor's his favorite son, so he went with Fëanor to support him, and of course Fingolfin is left in charge in Tirion while Finwë is off in exile. But I've also seen it suggested in the fandom that it was sort of Finwë's way of protesting against the sentence, and that he was resenting the fact that the Valar had chosen to intervene in a purely Noldor affair, which I kind of like that interpretation myself because, it goes with my general feelings on the Valar's intervention in this matter. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that. Now, after this chapter, shit is really going to hit the fan. This is the part where the book starts to really get good, and engaging, and we're not just listing names, although we have one more name dump chapter that we're going to have to get through, but that's not coming up for a little while yet. So yeah, shit is going to hit the fan in a big way in the next episode. So we have Melkor out there getting ready to cause trouble, and he will be making a comeback in the next episode, I can assure you. So that's about it for this one. I hope you enjoyed listening, and take care.